Some of the stories that I want to tell in my art is talking about society and human beings, particularly maybe the darker side of that. It's a part of life, it's natural, it's necessary.
I'm Eli Scheinman, head of art at Proof. Today we are talking to the amazing artist Other World. We're going to go behind the scenes, learn about his process, and talk about his new collection called Visions.
The whole collection focuses on the tragic side of life. Yeah, through all the tragedy, there is still hope.
12 new pieces that explore his process, his evolution as an artist.
It's a juxtaposition of the modern over the old. It's different, it's abstract.
Using Renaissance images, collage, texture. We had a great discussion, and it's a pleasure to share this conversation with Other World. All right, welcome, Other World. This is going to be, I think, a really interesting conversation. There's so many layers of your work and of your practice to unpack. But let's go back for a moment. Most people will know who you are and have some context. But how do you describe the origins of your creative and your artistic journey?
I mean, I've always been into art in the sense of like drawing. I've always liked to draw characters growing up, but it was just for fun most of the time. During undergrad, I didn't really make any art at all until I got to grad school, especially when there was the lockdown. I had a little bit more free time. I got into digital art. I've always liked detail in art and art that you could kind of look at for a while and people could have their own interpretations of. But yeah, through digital art, I began with a collage approach, and I wanted to create works that were bigger in scale, that I worked on for more than a few days at a time. And in parts, I developed these characters, the fiends, and kind of developed a story that I'm telling now.
There's a couple of things that I want to definitely unpack. We were having a conversation, though, the other day, and you were sitting in this couch, and there was this sort of ornate structure of the couch, and then there's this grandfather clock to your right or to your left, I think. And that was, I think, your parents' home. Talk a little bit about the environment in which you grew up. And was it an artistic household? Was the idea that when you were sketching, was that absurd or was it encouraged? Talk about sort of those early days, your upbringing in that environment a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, my parents always encouraged me to make art. I even took art lessons for about a year. It was like a once a week. My mom's always been, artistic. She would recreate paintings with crochet. They've always liked a certain type of aesthetic, like the couch you saw, a little bit ornate. Some of the art around the house kind of gives like that Renaissance era feeling. And a lot of the paintings that my mom would kind of recreate with crochet, they were from that era as well. So I did grow up around that.
It's so interesting. Your work, I think in the early days, as I remember it, and as I remember seeing it on Instagram in particular, it had a very, and this is, my interpretation of it, a very modern and sort of street culture feel to it. Illustration and some sort of animation references. But now your work does have these undertones of sort of this historical element, this Renaissance element. You often reference historical images and historical artworks from the 17th, 18th, 19th century. Talk a little bit about how that historical element plays into your work now as part of this sort of collage mixed media approach.
Yeah, I mean, I've always loved these type of paintings from those eras that have these grand scenes, beautiful, realistic colors in them. And I think some of the story with my art is talking about society and human beings, particularly maybe the darker side of that, of society and humans. And some of the stories that I want to tell with my art, these are stories that happen all the time throughout history. They repeat many, many times. And it's to me, it's a part of life. It's natural. It's necessary even. And by taking these older paintings and sort of recreating them, giving them new meaning in a way, it's one way that I could say we're telling this story of humans that has been told many times before. You know, kind of, it's a juxtaposition of the modern over the old, from a technical standpoint, but also from the metaphorical standpoint as well.
Interesting. And as much as you can, talk about the evolution of your work and your practice leading up to Visions now, maybe, and then just sort of stopping right before Visions. You know, where did it begin as a more professional artist in sort of the more recent years, and how has it evolved in the last couple years in terms of whether that's themes you're interested in or the development of fiends and what they represent. Talk about those last couple of years and the way your work has evolved.
I've done a little bit more abstract kind of things in my art, introducing elements in the art that defy, you know, laws of physics. It's more of like a collage or abstract approach. Whereas when I first started minting my works, I put extra care into sort of making sure everything in the background makes sense. You know, it actually looks like a mountain, or it looks like they're inside this building. The lighting, those sort of things make sense. Whereas with the collection of Visions, it starts out with the piece Losing My Religion. That looks like a realistic setting for the most part. Nothing really going on that's abstract in there. This is the beginning of the collection. It's similar to my previous works. And then after that point, the rest of those visions, up until the last piece, are sort of exploring different ways of telling a story, very heavily kind of altering the visual impact of the pieces, different visual approaches, different sort of like experimenting. And I gave myself more freedom with this project, and I really wanted each piece to kind of stand alone in a way, be unique in its own way, while still having the 12 pieces be cohesive. And having a collection like this, having just multiple experiments and abstract pieces, sort of just makes more sense. Where it's like, this is a new direction, something new I'm trying. It starts out with something familiar. With the first piece, it ends with a familiar piece as well. But everything in between, it's sort of, it's new. It's different. It's abstract. It's crazy. Things don't make sense, you know. But they're all telling a story leading up until the end.
I love that. Very well said. How did this whole notion of visions and a collection of 12 pieces, one, how did it come about for you conceptually? Why did a collection feel right? And you know, that notion of visions. And then why did it feel important to release this now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the project, when it started out, you know, you were there from the beginning when we were talking about it. It was completely different. I had worked on sort of this texture study, zoomed in part of a fiend's hand. The first piece was he was holding a gun, for example, and that piece is in playtime now. But it was on its own. It was very minimalistic in what was in the piece, but you know, the detail was there, where I focused on the skin texture and that sort of thing. And then I saw that I liked the way it looked, and then I drew another kind of similar approach piece that was a texture study, zoomed in, minimalistic, and I did a few of those. But at the end, when I looked at it, I was like, this doesn't feel like a collection. Really, it feels like a part of another piece. It didn't feel right, so I gave it some thought, and I also talked to you know, people I look up to. For example, Sam Spratt. I got some of his advice, and it kind of led me one thing to another to visions now. Because when I was working on the first piece, Losing My Religion, there's these clouds, these stormy clouds in the background that I drew, and um, it, it looks great for that piece. But I'd kind of been going back to that piece for a while, between the texture studies and that. And I was like, oh, now I want to draw these clouds a little bit different. I want to, and then I would look at the fiends and be like, now I want to kind of add some abstract elements to these. And that was a natural kind of urge for me, to want to go in that direction. So I was like, why don't I do that? Why don't I just take the freedom to create what I want to create right now? And then I created a few pieces without really thinking of the overall story of it. The story sort of comes to me and tells itself in a way, for most of my pieces. And one thing led to another. I made a few, and I was like, okay, this could be a collection. This makes sense. And then I started to see a story evolving through these pieces one by one. And then, that's how Visions progressed.
And why that title?
So when I first started my Instagram account, I was supposed to make clothing. Like, that was my reason to start it up. Other World was supposed to be the brand name. And then I just got into the art. And then there was this clothing line that I never got to finish or even start, really. It was supposed to be called Fatal Visions. I was like, I don't know, it sounded pretty cool to me, but, and then I thought of that name again for this, and I thought about calling this collection Fatal Visions, but I just settled on Visions. Each of these pieces is a vision that one might see in their life, or you could recall from past, whether you experienced it or whether you've read it in a history book. And even though all of these pieces, even the ones that are very abstract, they look abstract. They don't look like something you might just see. Maybe something you might hallucinate. Hopefully not. But the stories that they're telling are very real. They are things that anyone could experience. And what the fiends are going through in each of these pieces, they are very, very real, very realistic. They have happened before, and they will continue to happen. So I think it was a very fitting name to name it Visions for that reason.
Yeah. Let's continue down that path for a moment. The fiends are in many ways the central characters that show up across all of the 12 pieces. But then throughout the 12, there's this amazing complexity and diversity of other elements, right? And so you have the cherub in some, you have the fiends actually themselves in different positions, utilizing different guns or holding different things, playing different roles. You have these very tiny figures that are in other elements of the work. You of course have these backgrounds that themselves are incredible works of art, a standalone in many ways pieces. Talk about some of those other elements.
So the piece Playtime, it has a very kind of funny or joking kind of approach to something serious. And one of the small things that I've added in there that are not in the other pieces are these little stick figures, like literally stick figures. They're not like the little devils, but just stick figures with not much detail to them, in little action scenes spread across that piece. For example, that when I was growing up, I would always draw out kind of war scenes with stick figures when I was in class on the lined paper. It was just so fun to me to draw out these scenes. So I just recalled that, and I was like, let me draw some of that right now into that piece. That was already such a sort of lighthearted, joking, piece in a way. So it really fit perfectly into that piece. That wasn't taking itself too seriously.
I love that. And what other sort of anecdotes can you share about some of the other pieces? You mentioned Man in the Mirror, and the process of creating that piece and going back and forth in its creation. And I think you said something that you were falling asleep and another idea came to you. Maybe talk about Man in the Mirror and some of the behind the scenes in the creation of that piece.
So I finished sort of the first version of it more than a month ago. And then I went on to work on the other pieces. And at the time, that piece felt complete. But everything kind of changed when I worked on the final piece of the project. It just ended up being so good. The detail was, it was just, to me, it's my favorite piece. And when I had that piece, I was like, okay, this is just so much better than everything else. I have to go back and make everything on par. So yeah, I went back to Man in the Mirror, and I was trying to fall asleep, and I just kind of remembered a painting of Orpheus holding up Medusa's head in front of a mirror. And that just clicked, and I was like, that makes sense to go in the center of the two figures, the two big figures in the piece. So I was a little bit kind of stuck on that piece. Just that kind of thought came up into my mind. I implemented it the next day, and it very, flowed very naturally to what it is right now.
Can you talk just a little bit more about that that iterative process? That's my sense of how you work, which is, you get a piece pretty far, but then you're not entirely satisfied with it, so you go back to it and you tweak it, and then you set it aside, and then you come back to it again. Talk about, like, how do you know when something is done?
Really, nothing is done until the last piece is done, and so I've went back and forth between pieces. While I'm working on one piece, I might get an idea for another piece, for example. And the way I know something is complete, I can't say for sure. I just I have to look at it. There's parts of it I'll be like, there's something missing here, or the balance is off, or the color is off, or okay, I've looked at this piece. I can maybe look at it for 2 minutes, but no more than that. So there needs to be more there. I like to have the piece feel balanced, even small little details, and then the color, like the contrast of it. Yeah, it's very important. Just the first thing people see, they're not going to see the story, in the beginning. When they first look at a piece, it might be across the room on a wall. They're just going to see the color and overall composition. And I think that needs to be, at least a goal for me, is to make that intriguing enough and desirable enough for them to come closer, and then they could see the story, then they could see the details and understand the piece.
Yeah, I love that. Let's talk about the final piece. Well, I mean, we could call it the final piece. This is Believe Again, right? Talk about sort of how that piece in particular is a bit different than the other 11, and maybe sort of what you can tell us about it in terms of what it represents.
The whole collection focuses on the tragic side of life, beginning from the first piece that is titled Losing My Religion. It's a lot of, sin happening in that scene, a lot of, the cherubs are in direct conflict with the fiends. The cherubs are not usually violent, but I've asked myself this question before, like, why do I always draw the bad side of things? It's not like I've had a bad life in any, compared to other people. And that just got me thinking. And I was like, I want to create like a happy piece in a way, but I just couldn't really create it. I'm like, it doesn't make any sense. I don't know. And then I remembered the paintings, Assumption of the Virgin. There's a few paintings like this. And it just kind of clicked. I was like, okay, this is going to be the finale. I'm going to use that as an inspiration to sort of give that piece this holy aura around it, and this sort of connection between man and God. There's no conflict there in that piece. There's only sort of good things happening, like there's a fiend pinching the cheeks of a cherub, or the cherubs are playing together. And it's sort of the end of the cycle, or the beginning of the cycle, depending on how you look at it. of through all the tragedy, there is still hope in the end. But this piece really, it was special in the way that it just sort of clicked. It tied everything together and just took it to a whole nother level. That night where I couldn't sleep, my mind was racing about that piece, about just my art in general, my career. It sort of just sparked a fire. And then it made me go back and put in double the time to improve every other piece to sort of try to match the quality of that one. Yeah, so that's why that piece is very special to me.
I love that story. Let's talk about the physical dimension of this collection of visions. Each of the 12 pieces has a physical print, a physical accompaniment, large format that you've been working with a printer in Los Angeles to create. Maybe give a little behind the scenes on the prints themselves, and then also, why was that important as part of this collection?
I've always wanted to do high quality physicals, and this just felt right. And it's going to be my first solo exhibition. Some of my family's going to be there, friends around, artists and collectors, and it's something that's more familiar for people. Everybody's used to seeing art as physical. Having it on a screen could be done very well as well, and Proof has done a great job at that. But just having it on a screen itself, there's a break there between that art and most people. When it's physical, it draws them in, it feels natural. Then they don't worry about the screen, then they could think about the kind of story of the piece and get engulfed in it much easier, at least now, in this point in time. And then from that, I'm hoping people will sort of look at it, judge the art by what it is, and then they'll ask questions about the crypto element. Oh, there's an NFT that comes with it, and then it could go. The conversation can move forward in that way.
And what kind of details can you share about the physicals? Either whether it's paper or printing method, size, frames, anything you can share.
Yeah, they're pretty large. They're going to be 42 inches in width, 16:9 ratio. Framed. I'm very picky. The reason I haven't done prints so far is just because I haven't been able to find the time and go in and sort of find the right printer for this job. But yeah, Paul from Picture Frame Gallery has been, he has a sort of attitude of like he takes on the artist projects almost as his own. So he really wants to do a great job at them. And the quality is the best that I've seen so far. And one important thing to me is like being able to pick out the small details that are in the digital, in the physical as well, having the colors match. So all of those things have been completed with this printing process.
It's amazing. I can't wait I've seen some videos behind the scenes of the physicals and some macro shots, but haven't seen them myself in person yet.
You haven't seen them in person yet, yeah?
Yeah, not yet. This has been great. Is there anything we did not cover as it relates to your vision for visions, your the way you want collectors to experience individual pieces or the entire series of works?
But I want viewers in general, they might be super drawn into one of the pieces and they might just only care about that one. But I like for them to sort of give a look at all the other ones as well, look at the order of these pieces, come up with their own interpretations and look at the story as a whole, and then try to apply that into some way into their own life or ask questions about their own life.
Well, thanks, Mike. Thanks, Other World. Amazing. Cannot wait for the release, man. Very soon, we have the exhibition on the 26th at Soho House, Hollywood. We're going to do a panel. We're going to have the opening reception and exhibition. Can't wait. And then a couple days later, the sale will open. So very exciting stuff, man. You put so much work into this collection, into each piece, into each part of each piece, into the physicals. So it's really a labor of love, and it shows in the quality. So congratulations, and excited to
Thank
help
you.
share this with you, with the world.
Yeah, thank you. I can't wait for the exhibition and to see everyone there in person.